Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the amendment which I offer substantially parallels an anti-bullying bill, 1253B, I believe, which would provide for protection to all students, regardless of not merely their ethnicity, their race, their sexual orientation, but all students, so that if a student, for example, was being bullied, and certainly there's nobody in this chamber who would want to see a bully have his or her way, were they being bullied because perhaps they were poor, dressed poorly, and were the subject of mockery, or perhaps they had some facial characteristic with which they were born, some deformation. Perhaps they didn't wear clean clothes and were odorous. The fact of the matter is that the universe of reasons by which a child is bullied can't be simply defined in a narrow, straitjacketed set of classifications. And certainly, one cannot deal with the subject of bullying without dealing with, as part and parcel of the problem, the subject of cyberbullying. Because given the anonymity that cyberbullying affords, given the anonymity plus the technology which enables that anonymity to be so pervasive, so cruel, so intrusive, to not include cyberbullying in a bill intended to deal with bullying is a glaring oversight, in fact, an error and a gross injustice to each and every student who's been subjected to this indignity. What this bill would do, Madam President, instead, again, speaking of classifications, it draws on the recently enacted law in Massachusetts, which came on the heels of that god-awful tragedy in which a 15-year-old girl committed suicide after she was bullied incessantly. And it basically talks in terms of bullying being severe or repeated use by one or more students or school employees of a written, verbal, or electronic expression, or a physical act or gesture or any combination thereof directed at the student that has the effect of not merely causing injury or emotional harm, but placing that student in reasonable fear of harm to himself or herself, creating a hostile environment at school for the student, material and substantially disrupting the educational process or the orderly operation of a school. And as I mentioned earlier, bullying by definition would include communications or dissemination of any material through the use of technology or electronic means. Bullying is hateful, it's insidious, and we shouldn't pick and choose those, we should not pick and choose those who we're going to deem to be shielded from bullying. This is universal in its application and is not merely limited to school grounds. This would apply in all situations, so that if somebody was tormenting a child by way of cyberbullying while he or she was in a mall, in her home, at a ball field, the provisions of this would apply. We do not mandate any particular type of instruction. We basically use the codes of conduct that were provided in the SAVE legislation, which was enacted I believe, approximately 10 years ago. Madam Chairman, Madam President, given the universality of this bill, given the fact that it's applicable to any category that might be contained in the bill in chief, and greatly exceeds the coverage of the bill in chief, not merely exceeds, greatly exceeds. This protection will not rely upon any racial, ethnic, sexual, or any other characteristic clearly defined in the Bill in Chief as being required before any penalties or any action can occur. This basically says there's an equal side between abusing someone by way of bullying, regardless of why you choose to do it. If you do it in a jealous rage because you think that someone stole your boyfriend, and you're going to get all of your girlfriends and boyfriends to abuse that person, to drive them to despair, to isolate them, to make them so sick and so desperate that they may well do harm to themselves if not take their own lives. That is covered under this bill. That is not covered under the main bill. And I can give you a dozen similar situations, many of which you have seen in one media account or another, of someone being driven to take their own life by the despair, having absolutely nothing to do with any of the categories enumerated in the main bill. So while I certainly applaud the sponsor for his efforts on the main bill, this bill in its scope, this bill in its reach, this bill in its ability to deal with the issue of bullying is a far superior vehicle by which to accomplish it. I would urge all of my colleagues to vote in favor of this amendment and protect each and every child that you know who has ever been bullied or may be bullied for any reason whatsoever. Any reason whatsoever. Any reason whatsoever. Not a limited universe.
Senator Hannan.